Resuming debate, the honour for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's likely this will be the last time I rise in this year, so I wish you a Merry Christmas, as well as all of those, all other members of this place and those that support the work we do here, including the parliamentary pages, the desk officers, the Sergeant-at-Arms, the Parliamentary Protective Service, and everyone here that helps us do our work on behalf of Canadians. So all the best to all of you. So we're on the last day of this session. They've called Bill S-9, an act to amend the Chemical Weapons Convention Implementation Act. As I said earlier in debate, I do support this, as I understand all of my Conservative colleagues, and it is a very important bill. It's one that needs to get done. But in the debate previous, I must take a moment and register my disappointment that the government chooses to blame to actually accuse the Conservatives of delaying any time we debate a bill. So the Parliamentary Secretary delivered his remarks. I'm going to deliver mine. There may be other members of this House that want to deliver remarks on this bill. That's the process of debate. That is what we are elected here to do. So debating a bill is not obstructing a bill, particularly when it's one that where members have not yet had an opportunity to weigh in. And I do agree that this bill is important and should pass expeditiously, but I will not be told by members of the government and their parliamentary secretaries not to speak because it is our job or our duty to just let every bill collapse and go straight to a vote without debate. So we're going to have debate on this bill. I hope that all members will in fact support this bill, as I do. So Bill S-9 will provide and ensure that Canadian law becomes more closely aligned, well, in fact, becomes properly aligned with the Chemical Weapons Convention. The convention was the world's first multilateral disarmament agreement to eliminate weapons of mass destruction such as toxic chemicals, poison, and biological weapons. The convention was open for signature in Paris on January 13th, 1993. And under the Mulroney government, Canada was among the first countries to sign. It came into effect on April 29th, 1997. And Canada's Chemical Weapons Convention Implementation Act is a Chrétien-era law that implements Canada's obligations under this convention as one of its original signatories. So S-9 is identical in purpose to two bills previously introduced in the previous Parliament. S-9 was introduced originally as Bill C-9, which was introduced by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the first session of the 43rd Parliament, and it was reintroduced as Bill S-2, which was introduced by Senator Mark Gold in the second session of the 43rd Parliament. Neither of these bills made it through the 43rd Parliament. And Madam Speaker, let me be clear, it wasn't because of Conservative opposition to the bill or any procedural wrangling of the Conservative caucus. C-9 was a casualty of the current government's decision to prorogue the House in the summer of 2020 amid the We Charity scandal. And Bill S-2 was a casualty of the current government's decision to call a snap election in the summer of 2021. So here we are today on the third attempt to get this legislation through Parliament to update Canadian law and ensure that Canadian law aligns with the Chemical Weapons Convention. So Bill S-9 was introduced in the Senate by the government's representative in the Senate, Mark Gold. So again, I thank him for introducing this bill. He did so on June 2nd, 2022, about a year and a half ago now, Madam Speaker. And this bill would make several amendments to the Chemical Weapons Convention Implementation Act in order to ensure that the Act is consistent with the Convention. So currently, the schedule of the Act of the Canadian law does not reflect the Chemical Weapons Convention's latest listing of chemical weapons, which came into effect in June of 2020, 3.5 years ago. The latest listing of the convention includes additional toxic chemicals under its Schedule 1, which now includes Novichok-style agents. Novichok is a comprehensive label that encompasses various groups of nerve agents that originated in the Cold War era by the Soviet Union as part of their chemical weapons program. And so future listings of chemicals under the Chemical Weapons Convention are expected to take place from time to time as technology evolves and toxic chemicals and their precursors change and require the listing in the convention to be updated. So that's why this bill is important. It's going to ensure that future legislation is not required to update the list of chemical regulation in Canada under the Chemical Weapons Convention Implementation Act. It does so by, this act will delete the schedule in the Canadian Act, and it will replace it with reference to the Chemical Weapons Convention. So as those items listed in the Chemical Weapons Convention, Canadian law will automatically align with those changes that are expected to happen from time to time under the convention. So to be more precise, Bill S-9 states, and I quote, "This enactment amends the Chemical Weapons Convention Implementation Act by deleting the schedule to that act and the references to that schedule to that act. This removal is to avoid potential discrepancies between the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling, and Use of Chemical Weapons and their distribution, the Chemical Weapons Conventions, as amended from time to time, and the portions of the Convention that are reproduced in that schedule." So the Chemical Weapons Convention and the Chemical Weapons Convention Implementation Act, they're very important, and here's why. 8 years ago, in 2015, Emilian Grabev was poisoned in Bulgaria by the nerve agent Novichok. Again, Soviet-style or Soviet-era military-grade nerve agent. 5 years ago, in 2018, a former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter were poisoned in the United Kingdom using the same Novichok, with a Novichok nerve agent. This was by foreign agents working for the Russian Federation that carried out this attempted assassination on foreign soil. And as the parliamentary secretary mentioned in his remarks, that there is significant danger not only to the victims of Russia's security operations, but random victims as well, because these agents remain in place, and any handling of these agents can result in serious illness or death, as we have seen in the case of the attempts on Sergei Skripal's life and his daughter. So, also in 2017, Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, was assassinated with a different nerve agent, but nevertheless an item now covered under the new convention at the Kuala Lumpur airport in Malaysia. So, and recently, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned and placed into an induced coma, but fortunately survived. So these events are ongoing, and it's important that Canadian law give us the proper tools to deal with and to deter this kind of activity. Chemical weapons are being used today, and they threaten civilians or citizens around the world, including in Western countries. The Russian Federation is using Novichok. It appears to be one of its weapons of choice for assassinations on foreign soil. It's a lethal nerve agent that even in the smallest quantities can potentially kill thousands of people. It's a threat to the safety and security of Western citizens, including Canadians, and that's why we have to have all the tools available to stop the proliferation and use of chemical weapons, including by ensuring that the Convention and Canadian law is kept up to date. In fact, just this year, on July 7th, the United States announced that it had in fact destroyed the last of its chemical weapons. This is an important milestone and a testament to the success of the convention. 72,304 metric tons of declared chemical weapons worldwide have been destroyed. However, Russia, having completely destroyed its declared stockpile of chemical weapons, obviously has undeclared stockpiles as well, including Novichok, which they use to target people in Western democracies. So last month, we observed Remembrance Day, Madam Speaker, and Canadians in communities all over Canada joined war veterans to commemorate the sacrifice of members of the Canadian Army, the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and Remembrance Day was initially, it was called Armistice Day, commemorating the first anniversary of the armistice, and commemorated for the first time on that anniversary in 1919 across the British Commonwealth, including Canada. And it marked the agreement that brought an end to the First World War, and on the occasion of Remembrance Day, it is an opportunity to reflect on the history of chemical weapons and their use, because it was in the First World War, which is now passed out of living memory. There's no one still alive with a living memory of that time, but we do remember, and it's important that we do every year. So we recall, as we're debating this update to our to Canadian law, that during World War I, chemical warfare was employed by all belligerents, including Canada. Germany produced chlorine gas, or introduced it into the battlefield for the first time during the Second Battle of Ypres. And they targeted not only French and Algerian troops, but Canadian troops as well. And initially, these chemical weapons required very specialized troops for its handling and relied on things like wind conditions to disperse them across the battlefield. But over time, new delivery systems, including artillery gas, artillery shells, and gas projectors had been developed. And unlike chlorine gas, which had a distinctive color and odor, subsequent gases became colorless, odorless, and making their detection much more challenging. So in response to these toxic agents, protective measures like gas masks and defensive tools have been devised. And by the end of the war, the use of gas had become commonplace, with soldiers routinely donning masks before entering combat. Chemical weapons had been used by all belligerents, particularly in the final 100 days of the war. In total, chemical weapons then injured 1.2 million individuals and resulted in 90,000 casualties, fatal casualties, Madam Speaker. In the lead up to the Second World War, there was a widespread international concern regarding the potential extensive use of chemical weapons. Italy had deployed lethal gas against Abyssinia, and Japan deployed chemical and biological weapons in its invasion of China in 1937 and onward. But it's worth noting that in both the cases of the Abyssinian War and in China, there was a disparity of access to these weapons. Only one side had access to gas, and so gas was used by these belligerents. In the Second World War, all sides had possessed chemical weapons, but refrained from using them. I guess one could say on an early application of the mutually assured destruction theory, but both of them had access to them. Both felt all sides had to build up stockpiles, if for no other reason than deterrence. So this was while they were not ultimately used during that conflict, the threat of the use of chemical warfare on a massive scale remained. So during the 1980s, we had seen that Iraq used chemical weapons against Iran and also against its own Kurdish population. Chemical weapons have been used by the Assad regime in Syria, targeting civilians and deliberately killing hundreds of civilians We've also seen that Daesh has used chemical weapons in both Syria and Iraq. So there's a long history of failure to ban and control the production and deployment of chemical weapons. Amongst the earliest examples of attempts to regulate chemical weapons was the Hague Convention of 1899, which enacted prohibitions against the use of poisons in warfare and deployment of projectile weapons designed solely for the dissemination of asphyxiating gas. Sorry, Madam Speaker, that's one's tongue gets tied eventually in this place sometimes, but the powers that had ratified the convention then eventually amassed substantial stockpiles of chemical warfare agents and proceeded to use them indiscriminately during the First World War. So the Hague Convention of 1899 was not effective in preventing their use. Following the war, the Geneva Protocols of 1925 prohibited the use of chemical weapons, and Canada ratified those protocols, but nevertheless actively engaged in research and production of chemical and biological warfare or weapons. So the Geneva Protocols, while there was not widespread use of chemical weapons in the Second World War that followed, the protocol itself did not prevent even countries like Canada that signed it from researching and developing their own chemical weapons capability. So that leads us to the Chemical Weapons Convention that is in force today. The convention includes a verification regime that's administered by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is based in The Hague. It's important that we keep this convention current and that Canada keeps its laws current. And the convention has been successful. It does lack in some aspects. It's not perfect, and there have been uses since this came into force. The convention does not ban chemicals that act on the central nervous system for the most part in its schedules. There's currently only one such chemical listed. Biological toxins, which are chemicals produced by animals and nature, and bioregulators, which are chemicals produced by the human body, they're not included in the schedules. And these chemicals could be fabricated or exploited for military purposes. So this is something worth exploring during the next review of the convention, Madam Speaker. So as technology evolves and as new chemicals and chemical weapons emerge, the convention must rely on amendments to capture and prohibit new chemical weapons developments. Bill S-9 represents an opportunity for us to maintain Canada's unwavering commitment to limiting the harm of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear arms, and biological weapons. Canada has made significant contributions to the convention by being among its first signatories. Our ongoing involvement is evident as Canada remains a dedicated member of the Executive Council of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, underscoring our ongoing commitment to this vital cause. So I would again like to thank Senator Gold for introducing this bill once again. My Conservative colleagues and I will support Bill S-9. I do urge its swift adoption to fulfill Canada's international obligations.
They don't filter bill again.
I urge this House to ensure that that Canada's own laws remain up to date and consistent with those not only of our allies, but those among the broader community of nations that strive to suppress the use, proliferation, research, and development of chemical weapons. So since the horrors of the First World War, there's been a near universal consensus that mass deployment of chemical weapons is barbarically inhumane, even in war. And a combination of calculated self-interest over the past several decades, and over the past several decades, this agreement as well, have mostly prevented nations from using them, and the world has not seen the mass-scale deployment of chemical weapons since the First World War. But we have sadly seen numerous smaller-scale examples of the use of chemical weapons, and Russia continues to use them for political assassination in foreign countries. So modernizing the agreement by deleting the existing schedule of prohibited agents and reference and adding merely just reference to the convention itself will ensure that Canada's laws comply with our obligations, and that we possess the most current tools for the deterrence and proliferation of chemical weapons.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, the member says he's recommending swift adoption. Yet the childish behavior that we have witnessed from the Conservative Party that comes from the Conservative House leadership is truly amazing. Think about it. The last time we attempted to bring S-9 to debate, the Conservatives moved a motion of concurrence in order to prevent members from debating. That's why they moved that motion, to filibuster the legislation. At the beginning of his comments, he said, well, we want to debate the legislation, yet he prevents the debate from occurring. And now he says that he would like to see swift passage of the legislation. And, Madam Speaker, it's totally amazing and mind-blowing how the Conservative Party wants to play these childish games. The question to the member is, if he supports the legislation as he says he supports the legislation, when will the Conservative Party stop playing these childish games and allow legislation then to pass into committee?
Point of order, the Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Conservatives believe that the House should sit on Monday, December 18th to pass Bill C-234 that will take the carbon tax off farmers and lower food prices for Canadians. I wonder if you'd find there's unanimous consent to do that.
Again, I just want to remind members, if they're looking for unanimous consent, they need to talk to the other parties, so the leaders of the other parties, to see if, the House leaders of the other parties, to see if they're willing to do that. Otherwise, these motions will not be accepted in the House. The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In response to the question from the member from Winnipeg North, is this member I don't even know what to say. His government killed this bill not once but twice in the previous Parliament. We are 3.5 years late getting this bill done because of this government's failure to approve it in the past. We do indeed from time to time introduce concurrence motions in this House so that we may debate important work that comes out of committee and get recorded votes on them. We are debating this bill now. I support it. I hope this government won't kill it again.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Timmins James Bay.
Speaker, it was April 22nd, 1915 that completely untried Canadian troops were hit with the first mass gas attack, and the Canadians held the line. We have a lot at stake in this treaty. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, given the fact that we see that Putin has used chemical weapons to support it in Syria, Rumsfeld supported Saddam Hussein in the fight against Iran in using chemical weapons. We need good international players who can actually deal with the serious issues in a time of a destabilized international global reality. Does the member think that Canada could play that role and the kind of resources that could be brought to bear, given our history with chemical weapons and given our role as a middle power?
The honourable for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, it's not often, Madam Speaker, that this member gives me an opportunity to agree with him and to affirm that as I'm sure he does, based on the question, that Canada does have an important responsibility to be a leader in the world in the suppression of weapons of mass destruction. And he is right. Russia is a threat to world security, and its ongoing use of chemical weapons as a tool of assassination, and we don't know what its undeclared stockpiles are. So I do agree with this member that on the importance of this agreement and on the importance of Canadian leadership in this matter.